it's Joyce. You are on the block party with me and Ernie Cefalu. This is Ernie's Corner. And Ernie and I were talking off mic about how much we have learned from each other. And Ernie, I envy your position as the camera is about to pan. Ernie is in between two Bobby Shermans.
I'm a sandwich. I'm a Bobby.
Oh,
If you went to a deli, you order a Sherman squeeze, and that's what you get. You get one of them on each side, me in the middle.
honey, I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah, no, this is a really an interesting pick because it has a story to it that's kind of different, but it is in order of how my career worked. I mean, when I did Jesus Christ Superstar, and we had talked about this in other shows, and I went to Craig Braun, and he was looking at the Dolls Alive thing that I had done for International Paper Company, and the tongue, and his suggestion of putting the lips and put the tongue on the outside of the lips, and that became the Stones logo. I was not employed or hired by him right away. I didn't want to. He wanted me to go to work the next day, but after the interview, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to leave Norman Levitt. The worst thing that you can do, and I've had it happen to me both ways, is to be working for someone that really appreciates the value you bring and gives you a chance, and to turn around and just leave them cold is not the right way to do it. I mean, it happens all the time. But I just couldn't do that. So I remained at Norman Levitt for a couple of weeks, giving Norman, advance notice that now his Decca connection was now leaving again for this. It just happened to him months earlier with the Jesus Christ Superstar guys. And now here I am leaving for a different opportunity. It was a very hard thing to do. It was hard for him too, and hard for me. I mean, I really liked him. He gave me a big opportunity, and Jesus Christ Superstar that was a career changer for me. So while I was still working at Norman Levitt, I would do a lot of freelance work for Craig. When I went upstairs to his art department to do the Stones piece, there was nobody up there. The reason why there was nobody up there was because his creative director, a guy named Walter Velez, had come down with a rare spinal disorder that paralyzed him from the neck down. And I never really got a chance to meet him until later, and we'll talk about that. He was in the middle of working on a couple of projects. It was a Frida Payne cover that needed to be thought about and finished. He had the pieces. Walter had the pieces, just like this Bobby Sherman album. Walter had a sketch and of a wreath that he was going to do with lettering that he was going to put inside the wreath and make a big Bobby Sherman Christmas album with the wreath, because the photography that he had, which you see here left and right, wasn't very Christmassy. It was just really good shots of Bobby Sherman, who was a really good-looking guy, and his career, both music and movies and television, was really launched on the look that he had. He had that good looking, and he could sing and he could act. I mean, he was the perfect guy. And the pictures weren't Christmas. And so Walter, knew that. I talked about it with him months later when he came back, but he was going to do this wreath. I saw his sketch, and I was going to finish it. I was going to do some lettering. I didn't really like the lettering. He just sketched it in, and I wanted to do something. And now I'm into lettering, so I wanted to do some lettering. And I was a Bobby Sherman fan. I really thought he was talented, and he like so many others had that look. Like Fabian was another one that I draw the comparison. They were both really good looking, but only Fabian really wasn't that good a singer. And Bobby Sherman was a good singer, but he also had acting. And Fabian did a couple of acting things. He was going to be the Elvis Presley, and it just never materialized. But that's how the business works. They find a star, and then they generate substars that have that same kind of look and feel, and they still do it to this day. So anyway, I had these two these elements. I had an airbrush piece that he had done of that wreath, and I had these photographs, and I was told to finish it. So not change it, just finish it. And then word came down from the record company that even though the art director that had assigned this project to Greg Braun was in agreement with what it was going to look like, the executive said, no, we need to put a picture of Bobby Sherman on the front cover. I mean, this is about Bobby Sherman. It's not about Bobby Sherman, the singer or the actor. It's about Bobby Sherman. He's got a young teenage following that love him, and they want to see pictures of it. Burton Cummings was another one that was kind of like that with me. I mean, very rarely did we ever do anything without his picture, because that's what his fans wanted to see. You know, they wanted to see Bobby Sherman. They wanted to see Burton. Anyway, so now I've got, you know, these elements, and I got to start from scratch. How do I put them together? How do I make it seem more Christmassy? And I have to do it very quickly. I mean, these, you know, Walter became ill. He was working, like I said, on a few packages, and not any of them further along to just say, okay, mark it up and send it off. It needed to be rethought out. It needed to be composed. And so I took these elements, and there was a headshot of Bobby that looked really good. And so I put him in the middle of the wreath, which is, I mean, it's kind of hokey, okay, but it's Christmassy. And then I did that banner. You know, Walter had the big wreath, and then he had the type and stuff, you know, Bobby Sherman Christmas Album inside where Bobby's picture was. I mean, and that wasn't really a long stretch. You know, I mean, they want to see Bobby Sherman. It's got to be Christmassy. It can't look like the back cover. The front cover looked just like the back cover. It's a non-Christmassy, picture. And I don't even know if these pictures were shot for this album. I get the feeling that the album was just something like, hey, man, you know, we should have, you know, Bobby's got these Christmas songs and we should do a Christmas album. And so he runs in his studio, do some Christmas songs. They're all cover songs, Jingle Bell Rock and all. And so there's nothing really new and original and Christmassy. So they just did Christmas songs and put it in this album. I guess they want to really, this is 1970, and and he's hot, so they really wanted to milk it, which is what record companies do. I mean, that's how they make money. And let's face it, the artists make money too. So, I mean, I'm sure that Bobby Sherman wasn't saying, no, I don't want to do this. I mean, it was a paycheck for him too. But so I put these elements together on the front. And then on the back, I just used, because there was no time, I couldn't even, I created the lettering that you see up there in the banner, but the rest of it was, it pretty much had to just get done. So I took the back cover shot, which was a good shot of him, definitely not Christmassy, but the front cover is, and put all the credits and stuff to the right of it. When I was working on this album, there were also a few other albums. In the time that between, I did this album the same way I did the Stones song for Craig Braun. I was a freelancer that was already working in another company, and I was just, moonlighting with him doing these projects. After a couple of weeks, he actually hired me because he didn't have anybody in the art department. There was a production artist, this kid named Tony, that was really, really talented, but he wasn't really a designer or an artist. He was a finisher. So he took what you did and finished it and did it correctly, mechanically, so that film houses and printers knew what they were doing. And he was really good at it. So, he didn't really have anybody. And again, every time he gave me a project, there were a few. I did a Frida Payne album. I did the Honeycomb album that we talked about. I did the Sticky Finger merchandising with the licks and all the patches and posters and stuff we did for the Sticky Finger album. Every time I got a project, every time I came in there, which was 2 or 3 times during a week, he would say, well, why don't you just quit there and start here tomorrow? It was one of those kind of things. And I just couldn't do it. I just really couldn't do it. I'm not wired like that. Here's a guy who gave me a chance, and Craig's giving me a chance too. There's no doubt about it. And at this point in my career, I realized that art album covers was going to be something that I could actually have fun at doing. Didn't have to put up with the craziness and politics of Madison Avenue, which I came to learn about. My dream was not really, it was more like a nightmare. Nightmare. That's why I was so connected to Welcome My Nightmare. It was,
I was just
I
going to
felt
say that, Ernie. We're both on the same wavelength.
it was, I mean, and I know you've experienced that in your career too. You get into something that seems like it's going to be good, and all you can do is think about how can I get out of this? How can I do this? Yeah, exactly. and so, and especially when the other opportunity is so perfect, because there's that thing of I don't want to leave in a bad way and go to a new place, but I don't want to miss that opportunity. What happens if I string this guy along saying that it's going to just be a couple of weeks and I want to do the right thing, and he just finds somebody else? That could happen,
It
especially
does.
if I were to, now the employer knows that I'm leaving. So I go back over here and he's hired somebody else, and now I'm out of a job, possibly, and even if Norman took me back, I mean, it's like no matter how much you love me, if you catch me stealing from you, you're never going to trust me the same way. Trust is like the spinal cord of life. You cut it, you break it, you cannot fix it. No matter how much you apologize and how much it was drugs, it was love, it was all these things that made me do it. It's not me. They're never going to trust you again. Trust is the most important piece. And I needed to, and that was what the great thing about Pacific Pioneer was. We were a company that we trusted each other. We were talented. It was like a family. It really was. And when you have a tight family, you just had an addition to yours. That love and that trust is shared communally. And we were that. And that was one of the other bonding things that my partner, Tony, which was Craig's vice president, one of the things that brought us together when we were forced to live together and make this satellite office work in California, we really found a new respect and love for each other. I loved him like a brother, and he did me. I mean, and so that kind of thing really needed to be in my mind. I needed to really be that person, and I just couldn't. And I did. I mean, there were nights that I'd be working on something, going, I know I'm going to go over to Craig's tomorrow, and I'm gonna. He's going to tell me he hired somebody else, and now maybe I can freelance from him. And I got to go back to Norman, and Norman knows I was ready to leave. How much is he going to trust me? How much is he going to let me deal closely with Decca Records, which Bill Levy and I were bonding? So the same thing is materializing. The same situation in Norman's mind is materializing because he just went through it with these other two guys that befriended Bill Levy, was taking Decca Records away. And now, he sees that the floodgates are opening back up with his account at Decca. Bill and I are becoming very close. And now I'm going to do the same thing. And guess what? I'm going to go to a company that's going to be doing album covers. And Decca Records is his album cover client. So it was a very early on in my career. I mean, I had been in New York just, I think, about a year and a half, and I'm going through these kind of changes. On one hand, I've got my dream. It's being on Madison Avenue, being a creative director. The other hand is like now my career has changed, and I'm having more fun and feel better about the other entity, which is the music piece, and it's something I always loved. So it was a really kind of torn here between this and that. About 8 months into Craig Braun, and I'm finishing up all this Stone stuff and doing other things. Quincy Jones, Smackwater Jack, we talked about that album, and a few other things. I was now picked to go to LA and open up the satellite office. A month or so before I left, Walter came back. He was on crutches and stuff, but he was kind of really still out of it. But he was coming back. I mean, a really nice guy. I had never met him. I had only seen the work that he had done. He was a really good illustrator, airbrush, and he was fast. And he had, he was just a really nice guy and very humble. And we hit it off. In fact, when we went to L.A. and left Craig Braun, we were all, Walter was friends with Tony, he was friends with Lou Morris, another one of our partners at Pacific Pioneer in the beginning. And so when we went back after we started Pacific Pioneer, it was a couple of months back into New York, and we had a big party at Lou's house. And Walter came, and it was really kind of neat, and a couple of the salespeople that worked at Craig, and the secretary showed up. I mean, there was no bad blood between us, and they all kind of knew, and I think envied what Tony and I had done, you know. And it was just really it was a great experience, and it was something that really made me um, well, it actually made me start Pacific Pioneer with Tony. I mean, guys that we didn't really even like each other in the beginning, and this way, it really it brought us all together, and we remained friends for years after that. I mean, and then we were pretty much just centered in Los Angeles, and pretty much all our New York connections had gone away, mainly with record companies. We were now in LA. The other thing that I wanted to talk about this real quickly is on this cover, it needed to still be more Christmassy. So this is what I made the shrink wrap look like.
Oh, well, that is
So
Christmassy.
yeah, when you get,
Yes.
yeah, and so you open it up and the album's got the wreath. Here's the pieces from the wreath. And so the whole thing looked, minus a bow on the front cover of this paper wrap, it looked like a Christmas gift. And so that was one other little addition that, was that I added that just made it even more Christmassy, because even with the wreath and stuff on the front cover, it still didn't have that enough Christmas, especially when you turn it over and there's just a really great shot of Bobby, what's Christmassy about that? So, adding this element to it, I think really added, and it stood out in the bins, in the record stores. I mean, it stood out, and there was really all there was a sticker on the shrink wrap that said Bobby Sherman Christmas Album. And there was no other copy or anything. It just looked like a wrapped gift with a to and from sticker,
But that is just so clever.
Yeah.
That's great. That is so great. Did you ever have a chance? Did you get any feedback from Bobby himself? Did you ever
No,
hear from him?
no, because it was just less than a month later, we were out in LA and
Yeah.
dealing with that whole situation and trying to, pick up business that was promised and never materialized, and trying to create. I mean, we were both, even though I grew up in California, I wasn't a native of Los Angeles. I grew up in Northern California. So, I was a little bit better off than Tony, who was born and raised in New York, and just like talk about a fish out of water, but that made us even closer. That bond, what Craig did in a lot of ways was really a great thing. You know how we can say we go through awful things in our life, but then years later, you look back at that and go, you know what? If that wouldn't have happened, all this other stuff wouldn't have happened. And Craig, I think he needed me because I was raised in California. I wasn't a New Yorker. I had done some pretty cool stuff that could get work and give us, legitimacy. And he trusted Tony because Tony was his vice president, had been with him the longest. And he knew that Tony and I didn't like each other. That was another thing. And so knowing that, the first mistake he made was put us in the same apartment. We had a two-bedroom
No.
apartment right off above Sunset on Highland there, and that was the worst thing he could have done, because he put us in together, and after a month or so, the first few weeks we didn't really communicate that much, and he was busy setting up the business. I was busy looking at portfolios and trying to create an art department, but as the time went on, because we had a time limit, there was 3 months. That was my deal. After 3 months, I made sure he gave me a round trip ticket for Bonnie and I, and we were going back to New York, and I was going to be the creative director in the New York office. And so we were really crammed to make this company work. And the work that was promised didn't materialize. And that's when I shared the two comps. I trusted him enough because the quicker the time went by, the more we were forced together to work together as a team. We can each be individuals and we have our attitudes and our egos and stuff, but because we were both committed to that company, I was committed to Craig Braun. So was he. He was promised a partnership and all that stuff, which never materialized either. So, but no biggie. But had all that not happened, had Craig not done that, we would have never started Pacific Pioneer. In fact, when I cut my deal with Craig to come out here, it was a round trip ticket for Bonnie and I, and I wanted an apartment for Bonnie and I separate from Tony. And he wouldn't do that. He said, no, I don't want, it's a startup thing. I need you guys to, I'm going to rent one apartment over there on Hawthorne, right above Sunset and Highland. And you guys are just going to have to make it work. And had it not been for him, had it not done that, I would have probably never started Pacific Pioneer with Tony. We would have never bonded. I was being courted by Craig's and Ivy Hill, mainly Ivy Hill, the printer, their competitor, a company called AGI out of Chicago. And they were pitching me heavy to go to work for them, leave Craig Braun and go to work for them. They were trying to set up an office as well, which they did. It didn't last a long time, but they wanted me to be their creative director. And that's a whole other story. But had it gone differently, Pacific Pioneer never would have happened. And this album is one of those reminders in my mind of how things can be really kind of messed up, but you can make it work, and that's what we did. We made it work.
And I thought you did. When I was looking at that LP, because Bobby Sherman, the fans of Bobby, they just love him because you can remember like 16 magazine and
God, yeah, on the front cover and fold out poster that you could put up on the wall with love from Bobby. I mean, it was crazy.
And you captured it. And in just a very short period of time, yeah. I really applaud you there.
Well, I appreciate that. I do. And it's funny because the next cover we're going to talk about, and I think we have some time, is the Partridge Family. Okay, this was an album that it was 1972. So now we've left Craig Braun, and we're still dealing with record companies because I had said many times before, Craig's whole deal was his salespeople. He and his salespeople would wine and dine and schmooze the executives at record companies and the creative directors, who they were competitors, but if it came down from the above executives that Craig Braun should get this package, then the creative director or the art director didn't really, they did it reluctantly. Okay, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, let's call Craig Braun or let's call Pacific Pioneer, only when they were made to. We were competitors. We were, competing against each other every day. And that was, and I've said it before, that was our biggest competitor. It wasn't Camouflage. It wasn't, Wilkes Braun. It wasn't, any of these other companies that had started up. AGI had started up an art department. And it wasn't them. It was the record companies that we had to compete against. And they had the inside edge, supposedly. But then we had a better edge because the groups had control. So even though the record executives and the creative director give the tour through the art department, the group was the final word. And we talked about that before too, when we talked about Lee Dorman and Iron Butterfly and Captain Beyond. I mean, thank God for Lee. There have been people along the way in my career that have always helped us, be successful. And it wasn't always just on our backs. This is a perfect example of that. This Partridge Family comp, it's not an album. It was never bought. But we were still doing work. Bell Records was one of an account that we did some work for. And this relationship that we still were working with the New York clients and the record companies, this package came down. Now, I was already on Alice's softball team called the Vampires. I had created the logo for Mark Volman and Davy Jones and Sean Cassidy and David Cassidy and Mickey Dolans. They were all on that team, and we were on the team as well. And so I knew Sean and I knew David, and they kind of knew who Pacific Pioneer was because we came out in 1972. We came out smoking. We were on fire. We were on everybody's lips. It was really, truly that. So what happened here, like the Bobby Sherman album, was we got called, well, my partner Tony was talking with his connection at Bell Records in New York, and they said, well, we're doing this we're doing this Partridge Family album, and we don't really have a title for it, but it's got to be the Partridge Family. Okay, and We need it right away. We've been messing around with our own art department, really hasn't hit on anything that we like. So here's an opportunity for you guys to, and not every art director and record companies was adverse to us. There were some who embraced us because they had 20 releases that month. I mean, they run out of their own art department, gets, exhausted. And so they have to go to outside. A lot of times they go to individual freelance illustrators that would do a cover for them. And we would get packages from these record companies. I mean, it wasn't something that we could depend on. And as time went on, it got less and less. And more with the groups like Alice and Black Oak kept coming back. Kenny Rankin, George Carlin, they kept coming back. And so we got this opportunity we don't have a title. We just know it's going to be a Partridge Family album. And this is 1972, and the Partridge Family was real popular. I mean, they were, David Cassidy had become a big rocker. He had a music career, and they were kind of pushing that too. And so they said, okay, we need something. We needed something quick. We have 2 days to do something. And we don't really have any photography yet, but there are other ways to get photos. I think they even gave us some glossies. This is a hand tinted print from a black and white glossy, a PR glossy.
Oh my!
But that's all we had to work with. And so I created that lettering, and I did this pattern behind it, these little characters down here at the bottom, and just made it kind of feel friendly and Partridge Family-ish. And then this is the back cover. Again, just a comp. I mean, we probably have done, and I still have a bunch of them, and we should probably do a show with comps that were never bought.
That would be great.
I've done things for Leon Russell, Ringo Starr, Yvonne Elliman, Janis Joplin. I mean, there are stuff that never got off the cutting room floor that were really cool. Not that this is one of those iconic album cover comps, but it was something that was done in about a day and a half with markers and do some quick lettering. I wanted to make it special, so I didn't set type. I wanted to make it like a logo that they could use later on. And that was always kind of one of the takeaways that I got from corporate America of building a brand, getting the recognition, staying consistent to the brand. So here's a Partridge Family logo that they could use on other stuff. And that was the thinking there in this comp. So we turned it in, and they liked it, but here's what their art department ended up doing. Okay, remember the criteria. It's the Partridge Family, David Cassidy. If we'd had a better picture of David, we would have done what we did with Bobby, Sherman. We would have made a big picture of David with the rest of the family in the background. But this is what we had to work with. This is what they ended up doing.
What?
That's it.
I cannot believe, oh my heavens, the Partridge Family notebook. Now, here's David, who is so very talented and yes, handsome. And they ended up with that. That for me, as a fan, that would not have communicated.
Yeah. No,
I'm being harsh.
No, but you're being fair. Actually, what they did later on, I think when Rhino re-released it,
mm-hmm.
They put like a picture of the group kind of at an angle, almost like if it was a postcard, it looked like a postcard sitting in part of, small, but not real the whole cover, but just in this area here. They had this at an angle. They had a picture of the Partridge Family in the CD package, the little CD package that they did, or DVD, whatever. They had added that. Because I'm sure that, this was like your reaction. I mean, my reaction too. Are you kidding me? Where's the group? Where's David Cassidy? I mean, that's what they pumped into us. It's David Cassidy. It's the Partridge Family. And then they do this. And I think might have been politics. I don't know. I just can't see the Partridge Family looking at that and going, oh, wow, that's perfect. That's exactly what we wanted to communicate. So I mean, sometimes, what I've come to learn, Joyce, is nobody bats 1,000. Nobody. And I've got my strikeouts. My batting average is pretty good. But I've had my slumps. We all do. You're a creative person. You know what I'm talking about. It isn't always easy. It isn't always perfect. It isn't always embraced, And like I said, it would be great to do a show with just the rejections and the ones that never made the cut, because I really think that they were right. But again, what comes into play? Is it the group? Is it the record company? Is it the art department? What is it? Is it policy, or is it based on communicating the right message? I mean, we've always tried to communicate the right message with what we did. I mean, that was something that we could take pride in. And, to come back with something like this, never in a million years. I mean, if I would have done something like this, I would have put a picture somewhere, maybe a paperclip photo, on the page, on the front cover here or something that would at least have a picture of the group. But that's the cover.
Oh, mine were sticky, because like students are always putting little stickies on things, and even like back then in the 70s, that would have at least communicated a little bit.
Yeah,
I think to the fan.
Absolutely, and I think that they missed it big time. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of weird because it didn't stop us. Because a little while later, we got this album, which we've talked about in a show before. I mean, this one was really great, and everybody loved it. The people that were managing the Brady Bunch at the time loved it, and so I could have sit and wallowed and said, nah, these kiddie, teen magazine, that's just not it's not what we do. I've never said that about any project that I've ever gotten. That's why you'd be hard pressed to name an industry that I haven't done something for. I mean, seriously, I've done so many different things for so many different companies in so many different industries. It's just ridiculous. I mean, you'd be hard pressed. And so I could have easily said, nah, man, we don't want to do the Partridge Family. I mean, we don't want to do the Brady Bunch. We struck out. Maybe that's an audience that we don't know how to talk to. But then that Sesame Street package we did, I think is one of the best packages we ever did. Gives the kids the feeling that, and I've read reviews where people are saying, oh, I brought it home, my kid set it up and he was singing along with the songs and he put the big poster, there's a huge poster inside with all the lyrics from the songs and characters interacting with the words and stuff. I mean, it was just a great package, but it was for younger kids than this one or this one. I mean, it was, I didn't give up on that. I knew I could appeal to them. I think that what we did for this is so much better than what they ended up doing with that. It just doesn't make any sense. But, what life does, really.
And not just beauty, because I think the world of you, but I have to go with your design. I think that communicated that absolutely did. Ernie, we have got so many great things planned in the year ahead, and you're giving me ideas already. Like rejection and like projects that never came to fruition. Yeah. We love to educate, and then just thank you so much for all the stories and for sharing.
A big one that I forgot to mention is the Cheech and Chong All-American Drug Dealing Game. That was going to be a monumental package, but it never happened. Got all the photography, got all the design, got all the sketches, but it just went the other way. Yeah, and you're right. There's so many other cool things that we've been talking about for the new year, and I'm very excited. I think next year is going to be a great year for all our neighbors and for us, and just pray for peace and love. That's really what we need more of.